Thank you. We'd like to start by acknowledging the Palawapakana people of the traditional custodians of land, water and sky country in Lutruwita, Tasmania, where Cathryn and I live and where the project we're going to talk to you about today is based. And also to the Kaurna people of the lands that we're meeting on today. We pay our respects to elders past and present. And it's great to see so many people in the room after lunch on the second day. So thanks for staying. Thanks to the conference for having us. It's interesting to reflect, having seen so many great presentations. Hopefully, there's been a lot of talk about co-design. Hopefully, we've got something a little bit extra to add to those conversations. And I think two key differences with the presentation that we're talking about today is one, it's different typology and user group is supported accommodation and said it's for people with particular acquired disabilities post-injury with ABI and spinal cord. And also another key difference is the project is not built. We have just in the last week submitted the final DA for the last sites. So we're not going to be presenting any building designs at all. We're just going to focus on the process that we've been through. So there we go. So a little overview of the presentation. We're going to start with a little bit of the project background, an overview of the collaborative approach that we took. Then we're going to talk through some of the tools and techniques, and then we're going to finish on some of the reflections of those challenges and opportunities of co-design.
So the Motor Accidents Insurance Board of Tasmania provides treatment and support for people impacted by road trauma, whose lives have been suddenly transformed. The supported services provided include accommodation in both long-term and shorter-term provisions, and in both independent and highly dependent modes, plus the therapy and medical care needed while people are learning to manage their new selves. Currently, care provision in our accommodation is provided by Anglicare Tasmania. Excuse me. It's a hugely sensitive environment, with services ranging from periodic therapies through to 24 hours full support. The client base is varied, as Ceridwen mentioned, with primarily with acquired brain injury and spinal cord injury, many with complex needs and some through their ABIs with challenging behaviours. Due to the high care and low care needs and the varied client base, the supportive building typology does not neatly fit into a singular definition, even with the building surveyors differing on where to place it within NCC categories. It has become an exercise in alternative solutions. This project is the epitome of the conference theme, something we will share in more detail later. But the challenge presented to the project team was to interrogate options for a new building typology.
So, as was introduced at the beginning, we're three practices that have been working on that, but we're also one university because I'm wearing two hats. So Jasmax are the lead consultant. Those of you who don't know Jasmax, they're a very large practice based in New Zealand, but now with offices in Sydney and Melbourne. And I'd like to acknowledge Mel Mason, who's one of the principals there in the health design area, who's working very closely with us on this project and knows it intimately. Core Collective are completely different. We are a team of three people based in Tasmania. We do a lot of domestic work, but many other forms of work, including some health design, but at a very different scale. And then said, I'm only part-time in the practice and part-time in university, so try and bring those research and practice elements together. And then SBLA, landscape is a really key component of the project, and they've been bringing their expertise to this from the deep geology underneath the sites to the kind of ephemeral presence of butterflies, so it's fantastic to work with them. Of course, as a co-design process, the design team is actually much bigger. There are too many people to mention in that, but I want to acknowledge all of the contributions from our very many stakeholders to the design process. But when we went into the project, we came in with this team of three, and none of us individually had the expertise to deliver this project. It was great that the MAIB were looking for an innovative approach because we had no standard solutions to base it on, and we had to lean on each other's expertise. And this is one of the quotes that we submitted as part of our presentation in the competitive RFT process for the project, and perhaps one of the reasons why we won the job.
Definitely. So MAIB's existing accommodation rehabilitation environments are dated. They're institutional and they have very limited provision for support workers, and they're devoid of therapy spaces. Currently, the service provider is operating in an environment of limitations, having to tailor their processes with no vision of what a new typology might look like. So both the built environment and the service provision required transformational change. And the project team, now undertaking the work, demonstrated their understanding of this, the need for collaboration and innovation, a broad investigative approach, incorporation of research, and an emphasis that placed MAIB's clients at the centre. Excuse me. The design team's collaborative approach, diverse experience and understanding of the need to engage continuously with a diverse stakeholder group, combined with their desire for innovation, set the broader project team on a pathway of extensive collaboration.
So this is another diagram that we had from the RFT presentation that was trying to talk about what we thought the collaborative approach might work, and it fundamentally included a core reference team, then a broader stakeholder group with a series of workshops, recognising that many of the client group, the residents and family members would have to, it might be a more organic process feeding into it as needs, interests and abilities were able to. And when we also recognise the importance of having an independent process that wouldn't be us running alongside that would form an evaluation framework for the project. So that's what we pitched to the MAIB. And having won the project and carrying on, largely it's reflected that process with a couple of key differences. One of them is our stakeholder reference group has taken an expanded, so it's a larger group than we initially anticipated, and it's kind of collapsed with those workshops. So we affectionately call it the sandpit team, recognising the kind of messy and creative space that we're working in, and that includes representatives across MAIB, Anglicare, and importantly, a lot of the therapists, speech therapy, physiotherapy, and really importantly, occupational therapists who have been working with the MAIB for a really long time and really have a great knowledge of their expanded clients. The other key difference is that instead of prototyping kind of happening somewhere down the track a little bit, that ended up happening concurrently with the schematic design through a digital prototyping process, which we're also going to talk about in a sec. So the first, in terms of the tools and techniques that we used, the first one, really importantly, of course, is just listening to people. And we did have input from very many stakeholders, from the residents and families, community clients and advocates, and the support staff who are working on the ground in the existing facilities. So whilst there was a diversity of stakeholder input, we did take a kind of common approach, a framework to that around a keep, stop, start, really simple. What are we keeping? What do we absolutely not want to do anymore? And what new things, what new vision might we have for the project? And then the quotes on the right-hand side of the slide is from one of the project stakeholders who said something that really kind of captured the vision for the project, and it's been at the centre of everything that we're doing. The next stage was to synthesize that information into something that was useful for the design team. So from all of that listening, that's not supposed to read that thing, but that was my messy digital sticky note process of colour coding where sources of information came from and organising these into themes and mapping that to become the guiding principles for the project around enable, engage, connect, protect, simplify and prospect. So these principles as well, they were collaboratively developed, so we tested those and refined them through the sandpit team. And then another form of synthesis was using personas. So personas were a good way of representing the needs of the current residents, but whilst maintaining some degree of confidentiality, and also representing diversity of both the current and potential future residents' needs, because we need to look at this project over a really long horizon. So we synthesised that information. We did use all of the stakeholder engagement information, but I also looked at academic and grey literature to inform that, and mapped it in relation to a model of citizenhood supports, which includes knowledge capital, what a person knows and can do, material capital, the tangible resources a person can access, social capital, connections and relationships, and personal capital, how the person sees themselves. Again, those were developed, tested and refined through the sandpit process, and we ended up with 7 residents and 1 staff member, and that includes a combination of those who really need very high support, 24/7 support, and those who live more independently. And then we use the personas in a fairly familiar approach maybe to some people through a kind of day in the life approach, looking at some of the existing facilities, looking at the concept design and using both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional kind of objects to map that and what this might mean, both for the briefing process, which was really comprehensive, as well as through the schematic design.
So for us, the personas were a powerful tool. They were highly appreciated by the management and board for their protection of individual privacies, and they were also powerful because of their ability to personalise experiences. So as part of this project, of course, board sign-off and key milestones and gateways are required, and the personas allowed a more nuanced understanding of project developments, often at conceptual stages. So there's power in these stories. It's a way of explaining and, dare I say, selling the developments to those decision makers who are more removed from the context of day-to-day life in these environments.
And just so you know, the personas, it's not a finished process. This is another, I just obviously love digital mapping sticky notes on the mural board. But going again through the research as we've moved into the detailed design stage to try and look at some of the very specific things, including material selection. And they're also really useful as more and more consultants are coming on board, and the expanded, just the interior design team have recently come onto it to give them, they haven't had the opportunity to participate in the long process of having some understanding of the diverse needs.
So another method that was used was the development of a digital prototype. So the digital prototype process was employed because it had the ability to generate a solution that was translatable for a varied stakeholder group. It provided a model that could continue to be refined and tested, unlike an actual build, which was considered, but which brings with it time and budget constraints. We did consider fully completing 3 independent living units, but the program elongation plus the additional stress this placed on clients involved in the testing process made it an unfavourable option.
Yeah, so the digital prototyping process has involved a number of techniques, so 3D printing, pretty, again, kind of common models, but it's great when you put models in front of stakeholders, and instead of drawings, I give people a pen and there's like sort of freeze with drawing something, but put models in front of them and everyone really gets in and gets involved and has a lot of fun. So that's good. This is kind of like happening as part of the digital process, even though it's not digital, but literally just doing the tape outs on the floor, moving props around. That's a really good way of understanding, have we got the kind of broad spatial the areas right. But we did use some technology as well.
We did. So we used some virtual reality technology. So the power of this 3-dimensional immersive technology and imagery to remove the 2-dimensional extrapolation and guesswork, especially for those not practiced in reading plans, was really valuable.
So Cathryn always looks elegant even with the VLR.
Thank you. and augmented reality as well. So the design team created this augmented reality monochrome format, and this enabled a translation of the spatial qualities and relationships and allowed focus on those details for a broad group of stakeholders. So the monochrome aspect of this was really valuable in specifying focus for us. One for me. Okay. So the one-to-one projection, like Ceridwen says, was, although it's not fully realised design, and I did have my doubts about the effectiveness of this process, this tool, but the one-to-one projection provided an ability to consider space and spatial relationships, to have several people within spaces, and we took occupational therapists and client representatives and board members, etc., to this facility. We were able to act out daily routines to intensify focus on small details and to enable competing interests to be seen and tested in a life-sized environment. And although we didn't have everyone in the lift like somebody did in a previous presentation, we did have everyone in an ensuite. So.
And I learnt so much from the occupational therapists at that session with the realities of what it means to actually care for someone and support someone in that space, and also had my first go of steering a manual and an electric wheelchair, and that was good because some of the people in the facilities are learning to drive wheelchairs for the first time, so they're not necessarily competent. So we were able to act out those roles and go, have we really got the corridors and the thresholds wide enough for this? So it was really eye-opening. So a few reflections at the end. Working these two things alongside the details and the concepts has been really valuable. It's allowed us to test an awful lot of things to make sure that we've got them right up front before we've gone too far with the design. But it's also been challenging. We're working at room data sheet level before we even knew really what the buildings looked like or where they were going on the site. So that has had its challenges, and I think it's most similar in some ways to working with a kind of a kit of parts approach that you then have to, you've got these things locked down and signed off as rooms, and then we have to get, careful manipulation of those on the site and the working spaces in between to get that to fit across the various sites we're working on.
So the digital prototyping process was about de-risking. It was allowing focus on layout, relationships, details, but one thing that it can't do is evidence, feel, or environmental quality. And as mentioned earlier, this typology is unique. Finding a precedent was difficult, Australia-wide, but we did locate one place that provides accommodation and respite for people with spinal cord injury, and that is Sargood on Collaroy. It's a place with similar aspirations, providing contemporary design solutions with an impressive model of care support. Visiting Sargood was a game changer for us. It gave a face to our prototyping and testing. And for those who have not had the opportunity to directly engage with clients, their families, support workers, allied health professionals, and to hear their stories that get etched into your memory. But for decision makers, necessarily involved but at a distance, these tools and the visit to Sargood were critical to bringing them on our journey. And I will say that this project is fortunate. The overall investment, still in its early phases, is large. Both financial and resource investments are extensive and, in my experience, unusual. And we recognise it's not always possible to enable such huge upfront investment. For the MAIB, however, whose core business is insurance, not development, this investment is critical. Starting a project with a question of what should we be building requires thoughtful, investigative, broad stakeholder-influenced, innovative approaches and iterative activity, and therefore heavy design investment.
So it's been an absolute pleasure to be involved in this project. As Cathryn said, I think it's an unusual situation to have that much commitment to this kind of stakeholder engagement up front, and we recognise the need to get the most out of that project. So the post-occupancy evaluation is a critical element of it, and just recently, MAIB have just recently engaged a couple of academics who are going to be working on that and setting up the pre-information for the post-occupancy evaluation, and there's a commitment to dissemination, and hopefully we get to come back to this conference in a little while and share some of the outcomes of it in the longer term. And just by way of a final reflection, so the challenges and opportunities of co-design, it is imperfect, inevitably. This has been an amazing version of the project, but it's still hard to get everyone at the table. There's always people who are missing, and there's maybe people whose voices aren't loud enough. And one of the difficulties in this project has been working with people with acquired brain injury. Like, the best option for them is actually not to know about the project until close to the time that it's happening, because it takes an awful lot of careful transition planning around that. And so we've been relying on mediated information for that. And there's also been some some communication things as well around that. So we had some control over communication, so you can't always say everything that you might want to.
So, as Ceridwen mentions, many challenges, and the investment is also a challenge. There's sensitive conversations, and usually with the people that we're hoping to improve the lives of. Shifting embedded operational practice to new paradigms that are only partially clear brings resistance and fear. And the often conflicting requirements and wants of such a broad stakeholder group, we're aware to meet those requirements is not necessarily going to be possible. The process, however, allows stakeholders to move from their comfort zone in some way, being drawn into different perspectives and situations. It challenges their views so that we can collaboratively work toward a quality outcome.
And just on the opportunities that building trust and relationships has allowed us to have a lot of those difficult conversations. Reflecting on Dana's presentation at the beginning, that's a critically important element of it. And who am I in that process? I'm absolutely a negotiator, have been all my life, particularly managing the relationship between my mother and my sister. So I've... Jeremy Till, some of you might have read The Negotiation of Hope. If you're an architect working in a in a co-design space, I highly recommend you read it if you haven't already, and talks about making best sense of a situation in terms of a pragmatic response. So, yeah, all good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.